chapter I'm dealing with today is called Making an Application. There is an application that is made by Lally's mother when Lally was a child, but perhaps it's also an application that Lally's making to return to South Africa. And certainly the events later in the novel bear that interpretation out. The chapter begins with almost like a summary of the previous time that Lally was in South Africa. We are told the last time she was home was 5 years ago. And it's a very, very depressing time. The word depressed is used, so other words like terrified, endless, bouncing uncomfortably along the rutted roads, etc. Lally was back because her father was about to succumb to cancer, and her mother needed help to move from the farm back to the town. Her mother also puts her under pressure, asking typical mother questions like, isn't there someone special? Hoping that Lally would have come back with some news of boyfriend, fiancé. In the background, Lally is also conscious that she's just lost Arthur, but comforts herself by thinking her mother would not have liked Arthur. Politically too, it was a very bad time. Listen to this description. The outgoing white government was squabbling and manoeuvring for the last scraps of privilege. Blood and killing in a town along the Witwatersrand, burgeoning stories of coteries of killers on those shadowed spotlights began to focus. And then Chris Hani slaughtered on his doorstep. It was a time of great fear in South Africa. No wonder Lally says she felt afflicted by cancers within and without, and flew out a week later. But there's also an incident which is much more cheerful and optimistic, although Lally refuses to believe it at first. On one of their endless trips backwards and forwards, they pass some coloured school kids, and Lally says, "Why didn't you send me to school with the colours when there was a school so close?" And her mother replies, "I actually thought about it. I did make an application." Typically, Lally won't believe her mother, and her mother has to show her proof of the application. I think it's significant that her mother says, that first term when you came home and you seemed so unhappy, tells us that Lally's mother is perhaps not as uninvolved in Lally's life as Lally would have thought, or perhaps prefers to think. The section of the chapter that I'm going to focus on now, I think is also significant. The house is in a mess, the tables are scattered, etc., perhaps reflecting what's happening in Lally's life. But we also see the typical official speak of the reply that Lally's mother gets. With reference to your recent request, we're afraid that we cannot accommodate your child in an educational facility designed for non-whites. Then there's almost a kind tone to the second paragraph. While many children experience some difficulties when first transferring from the home environment to a residential facility, says the official. Or was it perhaps just that the whites thought that they knew better than anybody else what was good for everybody? Lally's also forced to re-evaluate her mother. At first she's depicted in this chapter as a typical slightly liberal white who helps the local coloured school with a few boxes of chalk and a little bit of support here and there. But then we now realise that there was much more to her. She did know her daughter was suffering, but what was she to do? The system wouldn't allow her to keep her close by. Typically, Lally wants to escape, and there's a paragraph right at the end of the chapter that says that when she orders her Bloody Mary, the tomato juice was rich and salty, the Tabasco sauce pungent, the vodka invigorating. Lally stared out of the oval of the window at the dark expanses of the veld below, with their sporadic punctuation marks of farm lights. Typically, she can't wait to escape the demands, the questions, and let's face it, the fears of South Africa at that time in the late 80s. But then again, we're not too surprised in the next chapter, Ruth in the living room, where she's glad to escape from the affair with Pim too, as that is typical of Lally.